Thanks for staying with us. Former Liberian President Johnson Sirleaf has called on African leaders to speed up effective measures to protect women and children. This as the African Union's third men's conference kicked off in South Africa. It will provide an opportunity to consolidate continental efforts in ending violence against women and girls in Africa. And she hopes heads of state and governments will attend the event to hear voices from the continent. And she also says strong policies and laws are required to protect the most vulnerable in society.
I'm pleased that as a patron of the African Women Leaders Network, we will be coming to bring to the heads of state the results of robust consultations among several groups about protection of violence against women. And we're calling for the heads of state to act quickly on this, the request for this convention for them for the protection of women and the promotion of women in leadership positions. And we hope that the heads of states that will be at the meeting will have an opportunity to listen to those from the African Union office that has to do with gender equality, gender issues, who will be put before them what has been drafted for their consideration for this convention. And the others that will be speaking will be other women leaders, either those who are heads of state, that will add to the voices that we have, bring their strong voices of experience to this. And we're looking forward to having the heads of states consider this very quickly and act on this. We are at a time when the demand for change is so strong, and those actions that have been delayed for one reason or the other can now be addressed through quick response from our heads of state, quick action from our heads of states on the convention, and more importantly, once the convention has been passed, to see that there will be full domestication of the principles of those conventions into the laws and policies of all the countries, as that's the only way we'll be able to have effective action to protect women from violence, and it's time for action on that.
SABC News reporter Kylie Kumalo was there and joins us now. Kai, good evening to you and welcome. So I might say, okay, we know it's the third one that they're having, but it is another African Union initiative that is directed towards dealing with gender-based violence. What are these specific areas that they really want to focus on? How are they being intentional about making progress?
Well, that's right, Iman, especially because, as you know, that it all started with the Kinshasa conference that they had. So there was a declaration for them to commit to have this AU convention on fighting violence against women and girls. And then they also had another summit in Dakar in Senegal. So it's about really looking at these commitments. How far are they? Especially because, you know, you have all these incredible policies at times, but the issue of bureaucracy really comes in the way here, especially because you're talking about 50-odd countries within the African Union. But now, I think there is a very clear commitment, especially because there's a clear recognition that the violence against women and girls is a very serious issue, especially when you look at countries that are facing conflict. You look at the likes of the DRC, the eastern part of Congo, you look at Somalia and many other countries as well, where women and girls are really bearing the brunt of the flagrant violation of their rights. But also even in other countries, South Africa, where the issue of the intimate partners who are really committing these acts. I think there's a very clear goal this time around for the males to be the active participants, but for the countries really to make sure that they really do see action coming out of these gatherings.
I mean, it's interesting. So they've introduced some legal opportunities for how they can, in a sense, codify the responses of the gathering such as this. So there's the African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. How is this actually going to influence what happens in member states? And it ties back directly to what you're saying, where this violence is committed in the name of war and conflict. That seems to be almost a separate discussion within the African Union around how to deal with such member states.
Well, that's right, Iman, and it's a very tough subject matter, especially because, I mean, when you talk about some of these conventions, whether you're looking at Maputo Protocol, when it comes to the women's rights, whether you're looking at some of the declarations, for example, that have been made within the structures of the AU, for example, from 2020 to 2030, for the inclusion of women into the financial sector and also the empowerment when it comes to the economic benefits. So you look at those areas as well. But something that was very important that was mentioned by the former South African Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, when she said, this is a pandemic. So what we do need to see are very collective actions and responses, just like how we dealt with COVID-19. We saw the restrictions, so that you really see that this is a very grave issue and it's been happening for some time, but you haven't really seen political will in addressing this particular issue.
And speaking of political will, you've had influential people, heads of state, co-sign on a gathering like this. We know that the South African president will be addressing the summit tomorrow, but this comes against a backdrop of something you've already mentioned, these oppressively and devastatingly high numbers of GBV even in our own country. What is he likely to say to the gathering?
I think it's going to affirm South Africa's position that, well, his administration is working so hard in dealing with these cases, but obviously, I mean, nothing much really has happened in terms of seeing these cases abating. But also what is going to be very interesting really would just to get his response, because he's one of the very founders of this particular gathering, if you like, because when he was the African Union chairperson in 2020, he was not able to have such a gathering of this magnitude, obviously because of COVID-19. But then you do have the Comoros president who said, look, let's go back to this particular issue because it's been identified as an impediment, especially for women, for the girls in the continent, especially because, I mean, just to quote the former Liberian president, she said, as long as the women and girls are not safe, no one is safe. So we need that, the safety to be guaranteed for each and every African, for the continent to see development and economic growth.
I mean, you probably understand why, on the one hand, you could welcome an initiative like this, have the conversation, have the most powerful people in office who are writing policy or who are influencing policy be there in the room. And on the other hand, jarring and the contrast with the lived experience of people who are dealing with the fundamentals of even being able to report and write or lay a charge at a police station or be supported by your community. We hear very different stories on this on the African continent. Maybe to close then, who are the other stakeholders? So yes, you've got the glitterati, so to speak, of international or member states across the continent. In terms of the stakeholders, who is telling the story at this gathering?
So it's quite a very diverse groupings that you have, Iman. I mean, you do have the religious sector, you do have the civil society, and many other streams as well. So I think what is very important for them is really seeing the African continent really rallying behind this particular issue that is seen as a crisis, especially because we do know that when it comes to the gender-based violence, for example, the Minister of Women and People Living with Disability and Children, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, she was saying that what would be so ideal is to see each and every male figure making that particular personal pledge to say, I will not be a perpetrator. But obviously, I mean, the issue of action driven, I think that's always a very key issue, as opposed to just ideally. seeing things, but really on the ground, effectively, is it really happening?
Yeah, talking is the first part. It's the action and measuring the impact is where the truth of those actions are revealed. Kaya, thank you. We've got when does it end?
So tomorrow it's the last day, so we expect a declaration of some sort and certain, adoption of certain policies as a way forward.